Welcome back! Today I'm going to take you to Venice, where I just have recently spent a couple of days. Venice, the city where you spend about $100 just to spend 20 minutes on a gondola on the little rivers around or through the city. Totally worth it, hashtag amazing. Okay, well, apart from that, it was actually quite an incredible experience because I was there at the end of January, and at the end of January it's definitely off-season, and that is easily recognizable by just nobody being in there. So of course you have the main touristic places to be relatively full, but it's very easy to move through all these tiny little streets and just to use a gondola to be, kind of alone on the little, tiny paths in between the buildings. So it was totally worth it just to go there while it was incredibly freezing. It's definitely a place worthwhile going off-season. Today is the first one of many where I show you one of the, I suppose simple canals they have, where just a lonely gondola person is driving through the tiny little canal. Alright, let's get going and jump right into Photoshop, where I'm going to show you how I transform this image to that image in Photoshop. Alright guys, let's jump right in. Remember, if you're new and you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe, and also if you do like the video, do not forget to hit the thumbs up button. So what's going to happen today? We're going to start off with the sky. So let's just quickly create a new layer by hit Command Alt Shift and N, and let's draw the stuff in. Okay, so first of all, the sky, where is it? I don't know, but I want to make sure that there's actually some more blue and that you can actually see where like the clouds are and stuff like that. So just bring it out a little bit. I want to make sure that these buildings on this side, right, that these are properly colored. So we're going to get the red out of the side here essentially. We'll make sure that this is nice and visible, and we're going to darken down the buildings on the side. So we're going to bring it down on both sides just a tiny bit. All right. Once we have done that, we're going to bring our attention towards the river. So we're going to make sure that the color is massively increased. So C for color, increase, and we're going to make sure that the whole thing also is nice and bright, right? So we're going to also work a little bit on the brightness, and we might also tweak the blue just a tiny bit to make sure it looks really kind of, how do you say, glowingly, beautifully fresh. All right, so that's the plan, and let's just get going with that right now. So I suppose the first thing we can do is working on that sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm quickly gonna create a quick curve adjustment layer by clicking on the curve adjustment symbol on the right hand side right here. And now I can obviously drag it down, and I'm gonna have a look at that sky. And I can see if I drag it down, there are indeed still some information in the image, right? So it's not like the sky is actually washed out, but the information are right there. So that's the stuff we want to bring out. For that, I want to make a good selection, right? Because I want to make sure that I don't darken the buildings like, crazy as I'm doing it right now. So instead of simply creating a curve adjustment layer and then brushing stuff through, I can also use quickly, because it's a little bit faster, the quick selection tool. So if I go to the left and I select the quick selection tool, or I hit W on my keyboard, I'm just going to quickly draw into the sky. If I do that, it's going to more or less perfect select the sky from the rest of the buildings, except here on that little tiny bridge area. If I zoom in a little bit, you can see right here, the selection has also been made in this particular area, which I don't really want. Now, I can remove this part essentially from my selection by hitting Alt on the keyboard and just going over the areas, in which case it's going to recalculate the boundaries. All right, just like that. And I'm just going to make that incredibly fast here because I don't want to spend ages on just selecting the actual, sky and not the actual bridge. So I'm just going to spend a minute, and then I'm going to bring you back once I'm done. Alright, so I have made a more or less sufficient selection of the sky. It's a little bit rough, but it's going to serve our purpose for now. So with the selection, I'm going to click on the curve adjustment layer, and that's automatically going to sort of load the selection we have created into a layer mask for that particular curve adjustment. So if I drag it down now, you can see I'm only going to affect the selection, which was the sky itself. So let's bring it down to something like, I suppose something like that would not be bad. Once I'm happy, I'm just going to close that down, and that does not look too bad. So that's step one essentially, right? So we can work on the total color composition in just a moment, but for now we do have our sky back, which is kind of nice. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to brighten up the water a tiny bit, because then I have some sort of a comparison for the walls, and I know how dark or how light I have to make those. So let's just create, no, that's the wrong one. Let's create another curve adjustment layer by just clicking on the symbol. And I'm just going to bring it up to, say something like that. Once I have done that, I'm going to hit Command and I on the keyboard, which will actually invert what I have just done. So now I have a black layer mask in the lower right-hand corner right here. And I can use a brush with an opacity of, say, 20%, make that nice and large. And also going to be white, a white brush. And I can just bring through the opacity, the effect a little bit where I want it by just brushing it in. All right. So I can go in here back and forth. I'm just going to do that incredibly fast again. Let me zoom in here for a moment, something like that. Usually you would take care that you don't go over the edges of the boat and stuff like that, but you know, we're kind of in a hurry, so let's just don't do that. Okay, just something like that. Just so we increase the brightness ever so slightly so that it's a bit more visible. And this is essentially becoming very important once we use a couple of filters. I'm going to show you that in just a quick moment. Bear with me. Now, for now, I'm actually quite happy with that. So what I would like to do now, let's get the color out just a little bit more. For that, I'm just quickly going to create a hue saturation layer, which is located on the right-hand side here. And I'm going to increase the saturation until I think, and I'm just looking at the red wall on the left-hand side, until I think that the red wall has a kind of sufficient color. So maybe something like this wouldn't be bad. And let's also try to change the hue into something rather red. Maybe something like this is not bad. Cool, let's close that down, hit Command and I on the keyboard, which will hide the effect. And now with a white brush and 20% opacity, I can bring the effect out wherever I feel like. So I'm going to make sure I only affect that building here by going over it with a white brush, and in my case 20% opacity. So something like this. It's a very simple cleanup today, but it's going to make a big difference for the total image. Okay, I'm liking that. And let's do the same thing again and look at the water this time. So quick hue coverage, a hue adjustment layer, a hue saturation layer, increase the saturation, and this time I'm only looking into the water. And I think something like that for the water is not bad. And also, let's have a look if we change the hue. I actually kind of think I'm going to stay where it was, somewhere here. Okay, let's do the same thing, Command and I to invert that. And with a brush and an opacity of 20%, I'm just going to bring that through in the river itself. River, canal, I do not actually know how they are sort of separated in definition. Interesting to look it up. I'm going to do that later. For now, let's just zoom in a tiny bit. Go make that a bit smaller and just bring through that color change, or that color increasement rather, in the river itself. It's always dangerous because there's something very red here. So if I go over that as well, it's going to be far too red and it's going to jump out of the image, which is something I rather prefer to avoid. Let's make that a bit larger. Okay, that's not bad. I am liking that. Perfect. So now that we have our sort of base, right? We have our sky, we have a nice red wall on the right and the left-hand side, and we also have our river. So now it's time to darken the sides down a little bit, because so far the attention is completely on that building on the right-hand side here, because it's just so damn bright. So we just bring it down a little bit. You can do this multiple ways. You can use the exposure adjustment or your curve adjustment, or endless possibilities. I'm quickly going to use a curve adjustment because that's just, the quickest for me. So I'm going to bring it down to something like that, I suppose. Once I'm done, I'm going to hit Command and I to hide the effect. And again, with the brush, I'm just going to bring it out on the side in that particular building. I'm just going over it. And you might hear in the background, I'm using my Wacom tablet. That's why you hear maybe a little bit of clack, 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 clack. My apologies, but it's way faster than using the trackpad of the computer. Okay, something like this should do it. Let's also get some darkness in here. And let's have a look at the before and after for that little brightness adjustment. Yeah, so it takes the glow, this white glow, out of the building. And now we have to put the attention a little bit on that boat. So I would suggest we're going to increase the brightness a little bit around that boat. Right, so what we can do is I'm going to quickly create a level adjustment layer just to changing things up a little bit. I'm going to drag the midtones a little bit, tiny bit to the left here. Actually, no, let's take the complete brights and pull them towards the left to something like, maybe something like that. It's not bad. Hit Command and I to invert that again. And now with an opacity of 5%, and I can get 5% by hitting 0.5 on my keyboard quickly, hit, like one after the other essentially, I can just go over that area and can make sure that I increase the brightness of the area only here for that boat. So every time I'm going over that, I'm going to add 5% of visibility to the change I have just made. And I'm going to switch that back on and off just to make sure I've reached a point where I like it. And I think for now, that's already good enough, that's visible enough. And now I'm going to hit X on my keyboard, which will change the color of my brush to black. And if I draw black on a black layer mask, I'm going to hide the effect. And I want to make sure that the shadow of the boat, which is in the water here, is not that visible. All right, so I'm just going to take that brightness adjustment out of that particular shadow and only that shadow, because I like the shadow. It looks kind of cool. Okay, let's go from here. Perfect. Now we have a bit more light, which is nice. So next thing we want to do is we're going to be lazy and we're going to utilize one of the Nik collection filters. If you have not worked with the Nik collection filters before, you should download it right now because it's free. And why wouldn't be? So you can be lazy for free. That is awesome. That is exactly what we want. Now for that, I'm going to have to create a stamp visible. What that means is that we have created a couple of adjustments already, right? A couple of curve adjustments and hue saturation and stuff. But in order to use a filter from the Nik collection, we have to have our own layer with all the information on them. For that, I'm going to hit Command Alt Shift and E on my keyboard, which will create a so-called stamp visible. So essentially copying all the information we have onto a separate layer here, right? So even if I were to go ahead now and delete all the adjustment layers, the information will still be retained within the top one right here. Once we have that, we can click on top on Filter and then go down to Nik Collection and then to Color Effects Pro 4. Now, this is going to load for a moment, so once this has loaded up, I'm going to bring you back. And we are back, and it has loaded up. Awesome. Thanks, computer. So what I want to do is I want to use the filter, which is for the tonal contrast. And let me just switch that back and forth. So you see, look at the water specifically. It looks kind of dull, but if I switch the effect on, actually, it looks way more defined, and the reflection has become way clearer for some reason, right? I just like what it does to the water. And I also like what it does to the red, and I also like what it does to the sky. In summary, I just do like that effect a lot. So I'm just not going to think about it. I'm going to hit OK. And once more, the software will think. And you are back with me in just a second. Okay, and here we are. So here's our layer, which we had created before using the key combination, Command Alt Shift and E. Now in this case, I don't need that anymore because the Nik collection thingy is always creating a new filter for a new layer for us. And in this case, if I switch it on and off, especially let's zoom into the water just a bit like that. If I switch it on and off, you can definitely see it does a massive thing for us when you look at the water. I am in love with that. That is perfect. Even the sort of crunchiness it brings out of the wall on the left-hand side is really, really nice. I think it's going to add well to the image. So let's use that, but do not use it everywhere. So where do I not want to use it? Let's have a look. So I don't think I want to have this more crunchiness sort of feeling in the right-hand side of the building right here. And let me see, I'm also not too sure what it does to the shadow right down here under the boat. For these things, it's always kind of nice to zoom out a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a layer mask on that particular layer. So I'm going to click the little Japanese flag symbol on the lower right-hand corner. And now with a black brush and an opacity of, say, 20%, I can remove the effect from areas where I don't want it. So let's just get rid of it a little bit in the shadow right here. And let's also make sure that we do not actually affect the building on the right-hand side here as much. So just a couple of brush strokes to hide that effect. So I'm painting black on a white layer mask, and therefore I'm going to hide the effect. Okay, and also up here just a bit. Okay, looking good. Otherwise, I think I like what it does. Let's have a look at that boat itself. If I zoom in a little bit and I switch that on or off. Yeah, the only thing which I have to sort of rescue is that blanket which is lying here, because if I switch it on, we're starting to wash the color out, which is not something I actually want. So let's just decrease the size of our brush and just make sure that we do not have the effect in the blanket here. Attention to details. Perfect, just something like that will do the trick just fine, just fine. Okay, so we are really, really getting there, and as I said, it's a very simple adjustment I want to do here. What we could do now is a little bit of a vignette. So that would make the buildings on the right-hand side and the left-hand side a little bit darker, which would ultimately draw the attention either to the boat or to this canal itself. So let's have a go at that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create another stamp visible by hitting Command, Alt, Shift, and E. And if you're on a Windows PC, just replace Command with Control. So Control, Alt, Shift, and E. Alright, so once I have that, I go with the new layer selected, I go to Filter, and then down to Camera Raw Filter. There are many ways of creating a vignette in Photoshop. I have shown a couple of manual ways back in the days, but today I feel like to do it, well, not manually. So where do I want to go? Here I want to go. So once you have loaded up the Camera Raw Filter, go to Effects, and then to post-crop vignetting. And once I'm here, I'm going to drag this slider to the left, which will give us a black vignette. And I'm just going to drag it into a point where I think it makes sense. Maybe something like, why not something like that? I think that should be good enough. We can also change the midpoint a little bit, but I think that's okay. Roundness is not too bad, and feather we might increase a little bit. Yeah, I think just something like that. Once we have that, I think we are able, well, maybe actually, it's always tricky, I never know. So let's do something crazy. Let's do something like that. Okay, maybe even like this, perfect. And let's hit okay. And obviously now we have a vignette which is far too strong because we are even hiding the boat in some way. So what I can do now, I can create a layer mask on that particular layer and use a black brush to remove the effect from areas where I don't want it. So for example, I want to make sure that the boat is still nicely visible and that the canal does not lose any of its sort of shiny brightness, right? So I can just use that brush to get rid of the stuff here in the foreground. Also, I'm going to remove it just a bit from that building on the right-hand side. Just like that. Okay. Make 1000% sure there's nothing of that down here. That's nice. And let's also take with a very large brush just 20% out of the area right here. Something like this. And let's have a look at that actually did anything for us. Yeah, I like it a lot because before the image is a bit shiny, but now it has calmed down a lot, and we can actually see and sort of pay more attention to the particular boat. And what we also could do, just for good measure, is to remove the effect with 10% from the red areas which we had created before. Just something like that, just to keep the color inside and be happy about it. Awesome. Now we're close, we're very close. I'm just going to use one more Nik collection filter due to laziness attacks. And what I'll do is I'm going to hit Command Alt Shift and E once more, create another layer, another stamp visible, go to filter and go down to Nik collection and color effects, bring you back in 1 second. And the second is over, and I want to use the contrast color range for this particular image. So just have a look at that water, and you see that the water, well, it gets darker on the left-hand side, which we can definitely help, but it also does something very interesting to the water itself. So let's bring up the brightness to something like that. Bring up the color contrast to something like that, maybe. We could also change the color itself, but I'd rather not do that. I think I'm going to stay where I was. Ooh, I like that red. Look at that, beautiful. Okay, I think something like this might do the trick. Colors are always tricky. My best advice when you work with colors is once you change something, come back later and see if you still like the change. Because your eyes are going to get used to any kind of color, for example, like a red color cast. If you were to have that, you will not see it until you actually come back to the image a little bit later. Well, for now, I'm going to be happy with that. I'm going to hit OK, and let's see in a second how the image looks with that. And here we are, and please disregard anything in the upper half of that image right here. I'm just quickly going to create a layer mask, turn that into a hidden layer mask, a hidden layer by hitting Command and I, therefore inverting the layer mask. And now with a white brush and an opacity of 20%, I'm just going to bring out this kind of color change in the areas where I like it. And it's a very subtle change. It's not much, but it mostly works on the right-hand side right here. Now let's make it a bit smaller, go in there to something like that. Look at that, there's another gondola. Perfect. Do something like that, and I'll just bring it through here. And I'm very, very rude with the boat here. I'm going over it all the time, but remember, I'm a bit under time constraints here. Okay, that should be just fine. Let's see before and after. Yes, so it just increases the sort of, I don't know, intensiveness for some reason of the water, just a little bit, and I kind of like it. Perfect. Now, theoretically, we could stop at this point and we could say, awesome, we're kind of done. But from this point, you can always experiment a little bit more, because I mean, we have done simple changes and there's no harm in trying. For example, if I want to bring more attention on the boat, I can make the boat a bit brighter and the rest just darken it down a little bit more. Let's do that actually manually. Why wouldn't we? Let's create another curve adjustment layer, and let's just bring it down to something, actually no, but bring it up to something like that. Cool. Once I've done that, I'm going to hit M on my keyboard, which brings up the marquee tool. Usually it's kind of, it's square. And if I want to have the round one, I can just hit Shift M. And with that, I'm going to draw a selection around the boat. Something like that, I suppose, would not be bad. Maybe somewhere like here. That could actually do the trick. Okay, let's just see how that looks. Might as well, I suppose. Once I have made a selection, I'm going to hit Shift and Backspace. And once I have Shift and Backspace, I'm going to fill the selection with black. I'm going to hit enter. So, and now I have obviously a weird black dot here in the middle. So if I hit Command and D for deselect, we can see that I have a nice Easter egg around my around my image now. What I want to do is I'm going to hit V, which is for the move tool, and I just want to turn that around to something like that. So into the direction of that particular boat itself, right? Let's zoom in. And with V, I can just turn that selection around to something like that. It's not bad. I'm going to hit enter, B to get my brush back. And now with the layer mask selected, I'm going to go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur the hell out of that. So let's just work our way upwards to something like, maybe something like that. Perfect. So now we are darkening that place down, which is not really what we... No, actually, wait, are we darkening that place down? Yes, we are darkening the boat down currently, which is exactly the opposite of our intention. So with the layer mask selected, I can just hit Command and I, and I have inverted the effect. For now, we're just lightening the boat. So the boat is a little bit brighter now. Perfect. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command and J, which will essentially duplicate the adjustment we have just created. From there, I'm going to go into the adjustment, and instead of bringing it up, I'm going to bring it down to maybe something like that. And then I'm going to select the layer mask, and I'm going to hit Command and I. So you can see that now we have complementary layer masks, right? One which brings it down, and the other one which brings it up. And the layer masks here are complementary, so this one would essentially fit into this one down here, which is kind of cool, I think, always. Yeah, my fantasy is not the greatest. So once we have done that, I'm just going to go back to the adjustment, and now I'm going to make sure I'll drag it to the way where I like it. Maybe something like that is not bad. And once I've done that, I'm going to go back to the layer mask, hit filter. I'm going to hit the filter, whatever, and I'm going to go to blur, Gaussian blur. I just want to blur that a little bit more. I think something like this would not be bad. And let's also blur the other one a little bit more so that the transition between ink brightness increase and decrease is not that visible. So maybe something like that. Perfect. Now, once I have done that, I can select them both by selecting one, holding shift and selecting the other one, and I can decrease the opacity of both at the same time. So I can bring it to 0, and I can sort of compare the before and after for both of them at the same time. And I think I kind of like what it does for about 70% of the effect. But I also want to make sure this effect is not visible everywhere, because I want to keep the water quite bright, right? So for that, I can just create a group with these two by hitting Command, Alt, and G. No, not Command, Alt, and G, just Command and G. There we go. This is going to create a group. And what I can do now, I can create a layer mask for that group, which is awesome. So essentially I can hide or show both curve adjustments at the same time, right? I just have to create one layer mask for both on that group. Awesome. So let's select the brush and make that brush relatively nice and large. Make the brush black and an opacity of 20%. And I can now start to remove the effect from certain areas where I don't feel like having it. So for example, down here, that's not bad. Also, just a little bit from the sides here. It's just a little bit too dark. We don't want that actually. Something like that works a bit better. And just a tiny bit again from the left-hand side here. All right. And maybe even a bit more just on the building. Okay, so now we have changed the effect a little bit more, so now it's not quite as hard in the water itself. But I think we might as well get rid of it a little bit more on the foreground right here. And you see you can play with this, of course, to your heart's content. I'm just, as I said, going to be fast right now. I'm not even sure if I come back in 10 minutes if I were still to like it, but the techniques still apply. And they're simple today, which is always nice. Okay, cool. Something like that does the trick. And the water is shiny. We have a nice sky, a nice red in the building over there. Let's have a look at the before and after for our, what is that now, 20 minutes journey. So I'm just going to hit Alt on my keyboard. And if I click on the little eye symbol of my original layer, it's going to show that original layer. And I think going back and forth, we have done a lot. In 15-20 minutes, you can do with basic adjustments really a lot for your images in Photoshop. Awesome. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already and you're new, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and also to subscribe to the channel if you like what you see and you want more weekly Photoshop and photography content. Other than that, if you have any questions, drop them in the comment below. If you have been to Venice also and you have some kind of different images from Venice, I would love to see them. Because I've been there when it was off season and freezing, but I'm sure this little canal here can be extremely crowded if you just go there at the right time and it'll look super, super cool. So, show me yours, I show you mine. Until the next time, have a good one. Bye!